Hi everybody, this is my video recording of my power presentation slides. Let's get started. So PowerPoint slide number 1, entitled Case Study, is a description of what my case study entails. I thought it was really important to explain what my case study is at the beginning of my presentation because it serves as the foundation for the rest of my presentation. So David is a 5-year-old male with a diagnosis of childhood apraxia of speech. Thankfully, a Caucasian family has adopted him from Honduras and is raising David with 3 other biological children. Currently, David's speech is 80% unintelligible, and he becomes easily frustrated when people cannot understand him. His prosody is also affecting his unintelligibility. With his age, David is an active young boy, but he requires constant encouragement and entertainment. Luckily, his family has been so supportive and are looking for ways to help him communicate, especially as David gets older. So as you see, I have highlighted in different colors, underlined, and bolded 4 key points within David's case study. Honduras, adopted, childhood apraxia of speech, and are looking for ways. These are important 4 key points that I am going to talk more in-depthly about as my presentation goes along, because they are very important in terms of David's case and learning about a different culture. So, this is just a brief outline of what I will be talking about tonight in regards to my presentation. So I just presented to you my case study, and then within my case study, we talk about, or I will talk about, why is it important to learn new cultures? Why is it relevant for us as speech-language pathologists or as a general public to learn about new cultures? I will also talk briefly about Honduras' culture. I will also talk about adoption as it relates to David's case, and I will also talk about international adoption as it is becoming an increase in popularity as more citizens of America are adopting children who are not from the United States and are from other countries. I will be talking about childhood apraxia speech, its diagnosis, and how it relates to David's case in terms of him having childhood apraxia speech. And then I will incorporate some assessments that he was given, as well as a treatment objective and goal that will be useful for him during his therapy days. Lastly, I will talk about, what it means for a speech-language pathologist to achieve and be cultural competent. This is very important as not only society increases in diversity, but as the profession increases in diversity. I will then again talk about a self-reflection of personal experiences in regards to multicultural and some cases that I have seen over my past 3 different externships about different cultures that I've treated. And then I will also incorporate some experiences that my supervisor currently, right now, has seen throughout her 25 years of work as a speech-language pathologist. Alrighty. So, importances and barriers. Why is it important to learn about multicultural issues or different cultures? Why is that important, and why is that important for a speech-language pathologist? Well, I'm sure everyone has realized this, but diversity in our society today, whether it be here in Pittsburgh or, in Washington, the state of Washington, diversity is increasing, and it is going to continue to increase as our population grows. As we walk down the streets, it's not just one culture or race that's walking down the streets. It's a variety of different cultures that are being represented, and that is awesome. The United States has been deemed or coined the term a melting pot because there are a variety of different cultures that are represented even within the United States. So, as diversity increases, we need to be aware of the different cultures that make up our societies because not one culture is better than the other. They're just different, and that's absolutely okay. So while there is an increase in diversity in our societies, unfortunately, there is a lack of diversity in healthcare's leadership and workforce. Meaning that, the head honchos that work at these hospitals or SNFs or school districts, they really haven't been exposed to, the knowledge of these different cultures. And they really need to, because they are providing for a population that needs to be known of. So it is important for them to be knowledgeable and gain access to knowledge of these different cultures so that they can provide services to these cultures in an appropriate and accurate way. Another importance of why multicultural needs to be known is that it allows us to simultaneously appreciate cultural patterns as well as individual variations. So what this means as a culture, they do something together. However, within that culture, a person might do something so specific to themselves. So it allows us to see that, this culture might do this as a group, but within that culture, there's still individuality, which is so important, which is so important to be represented. It's also important to improve our self-awareness. We might think we know all there is to know about different cultures, but how much do we really know? And that's why courses like the course we took this summer on multicultural are so important, because what I thought I knew, I actually knew this much about. And I had to grow in knowledge about these different cultures, which, gave me that self-awareness of, what, I actually have to learn more about these different cultures if I'm going to, in the future, treat or represent these cultures. And then it allows us to familiarize ourselves with these different cultures. When we gain knowledge about the cultures, we become familiar, we become comfortable with working with these cultures. And that's, mainly the goal, is to become comfortable and, not back away from it. So when we become familiar, we're able to provide these adequate and appropriate services. So when we feel comfortable with a culture that we might not have been comfortable with before, our rapport and our the way that the treatment session plans out or goes is so much more smooth. It's more natural. There's less tense or awkwardness. You're able to provide services without feeling, oh my gosh, am I doing this incorrectly? Or, oh my gosh, am I offending them? When you're familiar with how the culture reacts or the beliefs and values of the culture, it becomes more comfortable during therapy sessions. However, there is a barrier to this, in terms of there are some systems of care that are poorly designed to meet the needs of diverse patients, meaning that there are some, organizations or some placements out in the world that, don't have a great system to provide services or provide adequate services to these different cultures, because they're not knowledgeable. They don't know what is most effective for these different cultures. And not every culture is the same, so one culture might respond differently to a treatment plan than a different culture. So it's really, really important for these, systems of care to be knowledgeable about these different cultures, because as diversity increased, there's going to be more of a influx in population of diversity in these systems of care. And then lastly, when we are familiar with the culture, when we feel confident, when we are able to provide adequate and appropriate services, that end goal that we achieve is respect. Respect towards the patient, respect towards the family, respect towards the culture of that family. We're able to establish a rapport. We're able to establish a bond that is essential for effective therapy. So, unfortunately, a barrier to this is that there has been poor communication between providers and patients of different racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds. And that's such a shame, because when there is poor communication between a patient and their provider, what good is a therapy session going to be? You need constant communication between both people in order for the therapy session to be effective. When that relationship is established, and when that trust is instilled in the therapy, treatment and communication is so much more, or is more positive and better for both parties in the end. So these are 3 different steps that a speech-language pathologist takes when achieving cultural competency. The first one is understanding one's own culture. So the saying is, you must understand yourself before you can understand something else. And that is so completely true, because you need to be rooted in your faith. You need to understand your faith. You need to live out your faith before you can go and understand someone else's faith, because that faith or that culture might be so completely different and harder to grasp. But if you're rooted in your faith, it might be a little bit easier to understand why someone might do something different than you, because that is your belief and you're rooted in your faith and your culture, and then you can understand why they would be doing the same thing in their culture. So it's important to understand one's own culture before understanding someone else's culture. And that can be done through, living out your practices, going and witnessing different events within your own culture, researching your own culture. So there's different ways to go about doing that. The second step is continuing your own culture, or understanding your own culture, through interactions with individuals then from various cultures. So once you have that grounded foundation of your culture, then you're able to, interact and talk to individuals from other cultures and see how those cultures interact and live out their culture. What they do on a daily basis, or how they, greet people, or how do they show authority. And you can only learn that, or one of the ways that you can learn that is by interacting with them and seeing it, hands-on. And then lastly, or third, you can extend through one's own expansion of knowledge. So you need to continue learning about different cultures. You just can't say, oh, I learned all I needed to know about this culture, I'm done. That's not really how it works. You have to, constantly keep up with the times. Technology changes, and it's not necessarily that a culture changes 180, but they might develop new things, or new beliefs might be instilled, and you need to continue on educating yourself on what those beliefs are that have changed. And like I said, you can do that through witnessing other people in that culture do it, or researching it, or maybe even visiting that country in which you're learning about that culture, to then finally achieve cultural competency. Okay, so I keep talking about this term culture, and I think it's very, very important to accurately define what culture is. So culture is the dynamic characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, defined by everything from their language, religion, cuisine or food, their social habits, music, and art. Now, I will be talking about this as my presentation progresses, especially in the Honduras culture, which was the culture that was, which is the culture of David. So, like I said, Honduras is one of the main points that I will be talking about in terms of their culture, and I'm glad that I found this picture, because I was unsure of where exactly Honduras was located in the world. So it is actually next to Guatemala and close to Nicaragua. just for a visual picture. So, little facts about Honduras. It is a country in Central America. Currently, the population is around 8.198 million people, and unfortunately, it is the second poorest country in Central America. There is a lower to a middle income country, and they have persistent poverty and scarce resources. So, it's not really easy for them to receive services or to receive different benefits within healthcare in terms of seeing a doctor, because one person might live in a colony, but trying to get to a doctor's office might be hundreds of miles away. So they're very limited in what they have in Honduras, unfortunately. To continue on with their culture, the main language that is spoken is predominantly Spanish. In terms of power distance, so it is seen as a hierarchical society, which means that there are different levels of status. So there's someone that's higher, middle, and low. And, the lower people have respect for the higher people, and so forth. Just a little basic knowledge of where Honduras came from. The term actually means depth, which I thought was pretty cool. Individualism. So they are actually seen as a collectivist society rather than an individualistic society, which means that, unlike the United States, Honduras, really cherishes and wants this strong relationship, this strong commitment, this long-term commitment within a group. They highly recognize loyalty. They're not out to get each other. They all are close-knitted. They watch out for each other's backs, and, they want to establish the strong relationship. In terms of demographics, a major ethnic group in Honduras is called the Mestizo. Their typical food is beans and corn tortillas that you will probably see at every meal. In terms of their etiquette, they greet with a firm handshake. So they are very proper in a sense that, hi, I respect you, you respect me, with a firm handshake. In terms of their religion, they are also predominantly Catholic. And lastly, about Honduras' culture, in terms of, whether or not this is a masculine society, it's really not. It's actually a feminine society, which means they are working in order to live. Their focus is on well-being, and status is not shown, even though they are hierarchical. It's not shown or emphasized. People know their place in society, but, they don't dwell on the fact that there are people higher than them. In terms of socialization, parents rarely punish their children. They allow for interruptions during conversations. Obedience is not highly stressed, and parents are not overprotective. In terms of uncertainty avoidance, they are considered a pragmatic society, which means that they focus on planning, but they have this acceptance of alterations even if it's within a short notice. So they are open to change, but they do plan for things. And then lastly, in terms of gender roles, Honduras is considered a machista or sexist country where, the man provides and the woman stays at home, caring for the kids and doing housework, but the men are fond of their families, and recently women are taking on jobs rather than, just working within the home and caring for the kids, which is good. Okay, in terms of adoption in Honduras, so because I wanted to bring this up because David is adopted, and I think it's important to talk about to see the process that his parents, had to go through in terms of adopting him. So Honduras is one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, and the adoption authority there is called the Honduran Institute for Children and Family. So when considering to adopt, they recommend boys and girls 18 months and older. They recommend children with special needs and older children, or they recommend giving 2 or more siblings at one time. And that is because parents of these children are unable to take care of the many children that they do have. So in order for them to, be taken care of for, they are put up for adoption. So when adopting, in terms of the United States side and the parents living in the United States, there are some requirements that they need to follow. So they have to be a U.S. citizen. The parents need to be between the ages of 25 and 50. If the parents are married, they need to be married for at least 3 years. Single women may adopt. And then in terms of having children already in the family, they recommend that if you're looking to adopt, that no more than 3 children are currently present in the family. When I was researching, the requirements, I was kind of shocked at how specific they were, since their need is so high. And I can understand, that you don't want to put a child in a bad home, but if there are so many of these children who need homes, what does it really, necessarily matter if the parents have been married for 1, 2, or 3 years? So I was just personally, shocked or curious as to why some of these requirements are so specific. And then what I thought was really important is to talk about, the language skills of kids who are adopted internationally. So research has shown that children who are adopted internationally are often referred to as a second first language learner, which means that they begin learning one language in their native home, and then after the adoption, they are exposed to multiple languages, which makes sense because usually the parents who are adopting the child speak a different language and then continue to speak their native language when they are home in the United States, that the parents do. And so that child frequently no longer speaks their native language and then learns and then converts over to the family's native language in the United States. Research has also shown that children adopted internationally were more likely to have poor language skills. So children are more at risk for language and learning disabilities when they are adopted, because of that poor care that they were receiving while they were through the important stages of development. Okay, so now our primary focus is on David's case. We talked about the Honduras culture, which David is. We talked about his adoption, and now we're going to specifically talk about his case in terms of his language and speech abilities. So he was adopted and brought to the United States at the age of 3. He was adopted by American parents who live an American lifestyle, where English is the primary and only language that is spoken at home. He received a speech and language evaluation at the age of 5. And when he received this evaluation, the speech language pathologist went through this process called RIOT, R-I-O-T, when evaluating him. And RIOT basically stands for R is reviewing all information available concerning the child, I, interviewing all those informers who have contact with the child, O, observe the child in a different context, and then T, test the child. But because David was adopted, the R component of RIOT was more difficult because his American parents didn't really receive much medical or previous case history regarding David's case. So all they basically know is what they know of him now is, that his language and speech skills are delayed, and that he's unintelligible. They're not really sure, if any family members have had language or speech delays or if there's any medical issues. So that component of the intervention was more difficult because David was adopted, but they both tried their best to, or the parents try their best to relay all the information that they knew concerning David's case. So then, another important component is because David is not American and he is receiving this evaluation in America, the speech-language pathologist made sure to observe him in different contexts, rather than just focusing solely on standardized assessments. However, the speech-language pathologist did evaluate him with some formal assessments, just to see how he does on them. So she did administer the Goldman-Frisco Test of Articulation 3, the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals 5, and then an oral mech exam to see if there were any structural abnormalities, if there was any presence of a cleft palate, any tongue or reduced tongue glatterization, just to see if there were any abnormalities, since there was not a good medical history. So during this evaluation, there were accommodations provided for David's case. So the speech-language pathologist did, luckily, have a translator present, just in case, the translator picked up on sounds that David said that the speech-language pathologist really wouldn't pick up on, that are prevalent in the Spanish language, but not really in the English language. So the typical errors that Spanish-speaking children or adults do is they do a CH for SH, a B for V, an S for Z, T for the voiceless TH. They also dentalize T, D, and N, and then final consonants are often devoiced. So the speech-language pathologist made note of this during her formal assessments, during like the Goldman-Frisco, to see if, this was more of an error in his Spanish language that he was carrying over to his English language. So she just made sure to keep a note that these are the typical errors that, Spanish speaking children and adults make. They also, gathered information regarding David's previous experiences. So David did come over to America with some toys that he frequently played with while he was in Honduras. So the speech-language pathologist observed him playing with those toys that were actually native to his culture. So she was able to observe him during pretend play or symbolic play, and it was really helpful that the translator was there, because she could help with how David was interacting with these toys that are not necessarily known in American culture. So after this formal evaluation, David was actually diagnosed with childhood apraxia of speech, which is another component of this case study that I want to talk about. So CAS is a neurological pediatric condition in which the motor planning and or sensory integration skills for speech sound production are impaired. Some signs or symptoms of CAS that people frequently see in these children are high incidence of vowel distortions, limited consonant and vowel phonetic inventory, frequent sound distortions, voicing errors, and then altered and or inconsistent suprasegmental characteristics such as rate, pitch, and loudness. So after formal observation, he received this diagnosis, and because he embodied some of these characteristics of CAS. And that's, another reason as to why his unintelligibility is so high, is because he is, he has a high incidence of vowel distortions. He was constantly voicing or devoicing sounds. He had frequent sound distortions, and then his prosody is way off. So in terms of an intervention plan, there are a variety of different things that you can work on in terms of CAS and David's case. So I had a difficult time trying to, pinpoint one objective and goal that I really wanted to focus on in terms of David, but this is what I came up with. So I said for an objective is to increase the phonetic inventory for consonants, vowels, and syllable shapes to an age-appropriate level. Therefore, the goal will be for David to produce contrasting sound pairs. So he'll produce a P and a B and a P, which are cognates, a D and a T, a V and an F, and a G and a K. At the word level, to reduce the voice/voiceless confusion in 80% of opportunities given moderate cueing and prompting. The reason why I chose this goal is because I hope that this will increase his intelligibility. It will allow for the speech-language pathologist to come up with creative games because they're target sounds, so she can feel on what David likes to do, considering that he's very active. So you might include like bowling or shooting hoops or shooting a Nerf gun while focusing on these contrasting sound pairs. And because David's culture previously was, the Honduras culture, and now they're trying to not convert him, but they're trying to incorporate that English culture, or that American culture. I definitely would suggest some things to do at home for the parents, considering that was another concern and target of this case study. So what I said is to decrease intelligibility, things that his parents could do would be to create a picture board of different themes. For instance, if you're in the kitchen, you can have a 6x6 picture board of different food items that he really likes, and if you can't understand what he's trying to say, and instead of him becoming frustrated, he can point to it. So that's an easy way to communicate his wants and needs. The parents can also learn some basic sign language, such as more or done or thank you. Just real basic sign language that, David and the parents can communicate back and forth, and as well as the siblings. They're not strenuous, they're not difficult, they're all with your hands or your face. They're visual, so they're easy to learn, and a lot of kids pick up on them, and they like to do them because they're easy rather than trying to communicate, which is something that's very hard for them to do. Another important thing to do at home is to encourage his speech. Never to give him that fear of not speaking. So when he is saying a word and you figure out what it is, encourage the right word by producing it and having him repeat it. He might not repeat the same way that you say it, but encourage it, and then, positively reinforce it. Oh, good try, David. That was a really good try. Mommy's so proud of you. Just things like that, so he sees that, he's trying, rather than, just discouraging him. And then the last thing that I suggested for at-home work is maybe repetitive books. He's still in a crucial period of learning development, and, since he is from this, the Honduras culture, where he probably wasn't read too much, it's very, very important to sit down and explain to him, what a book is, and to encourage him to read. And because of his apraxia, books that repeat themselves, such as like Dr. Seuss books or Brown Bear, that's the title of a book, they would be great for him because it encourages that constant repetition while also learning the fundamental of book reading. Okay, and lastly, the thing that I want to talk about is, what it means for us as in speech-language pathologists, to be cultural competent. So we are, gaining information from the patients that we treat, from the colleagues that we interact with. As, like I said previously, as our society increases in population, it's only going to increase in diversity. And, the more and more population increases, we're going to see a even more wide variety of cultures in society. And so we constantly need to gain this information in order to achieve cultural competency, because we want to be able to provide services to the best of our ability to cultures with the knowledge that we have obtained. So in gaining this information, we have the ability to accept and respect for differences, for continuing self-assessments regarding the culture, for careful attention to the dynamics of the differences, a continuous expansion of cultural knowledge and resources, and a variety of adaptations to service models. So we want to achieve all of that, which essentially allows us to be culturally competent. When we achieve that, it's a beautiful feeling, because you feel confident to treat cultures because you know the knowledge and you want to know the knowledge. And that is our job as speech language pathologists, to treat everyone, and everyone is different. And so we need to be aware that there are different cultures in our society, and that in order for the patient to be successful, or the child to be successful, we need to be knowledgeable of that culture. And, our primary concern, or our primary goal, is for the child to be successful. So, why not learn different cultures? And then lastly, I'm going to talk about just a self-reflection and what I have been exposed to with my past externship at Pittsburgh Public. I was in the Squirrel Hill location, which has a high population of the Jewish culture, as well as African American and Asian. So I was able to be exposed to a variety of different populations, and there were definitely times where I had to go home and research that culture, because the only way that session was going to be successful is if I understood the body language that the child was giving off. Because when they go home at the end of the day, they are doing what their parents do, and what their parents do is that culture. And I'm not used to that, because I'm from a different culture. So the only way to adapt to their needs is to go home and research the different cultures, or how to interact with those different cultures. I also did work with a child who was adopted, but he was adopted from China, and it was a little easier because he had a cleft palate that was affecting his speech. So it was a little bit more obvious as to what his medical needs were, whereas David, he just has childhood apraxia of speech. So it's not that physical observation. It's more of, that motor component that was missing, in terms of, does any family members have that as well? So I also think that hands-on experience with these children from the Pittsburgh Public School Districts has provided me with this increase of knowledge, like I've previously stated. While at the Duquesne Clinic, I personally, saw patients who were just like me. And so it definitely was a wake-up call when I went out into a public atmosphere, where there were different cultures. But to be honest, it was awesome, because I was able to broaden my horizons in knowledge of different cultures, and realize that there are so many different cultures out there that have so many different cool, unique things about them. And it's actually fascinating to learn about, because you wonder why they do what they do and why we do what we do. And it doesn't make it wrong. Like I said, it makes it different, but it's different in a good way. So yeah, that's just my personal self-reflection in terms of, this multicultural topic. And, I hope that it continues to expand for positive reasons, And I hope that more people, are open to be exposed to learning about different cultures, because, soon enough, we're all going to be equal, in cultural size. And, the only way that it's going to work is if we all respect each other. And then lastly, just talking about my supervisor's experience in terms of adoption. So she said that, just like what I've said previously, that one of the main things in terms of adoption and achieving or acquiring a case history is that there is basically no case history in terms of what the child has done previously to the parents adopting them. So it's very difficult to obtain a case history, she said, which is actually more important than people think. When they obtain a case history in terms of medical needs, it's nice because most medical needs are linked to previous family. Whereas when you don't know that, you don't know where it's coming from. And then not having a case history provides limited information, which requires, the team working with the child to work even harder in trying to figure out what is really wrong with the child, because they're not really given background information. And then in terms of, adoption, there are some cases that are easier than others, and those cases that are easier are the ones where there's a physical structural difference that allows them to know, okay, there's physically something wrong, whereas there's other cases in terms of adoption where, it might be a feeding or a swallowing problem, but they have no idea internally or mentally where it's coming from. They don't know if the previous parents had swallowing issues or if they had mental issues, so that's what makes it a little bit more harder and challenging, but then also a little bit more interesting and intriguing in terms of trying to figure out what the core reason is. And that's one of the favorite things that she loves to do at my current placement right now is cases in terms of adoption, because it causes her to really think outside of the box as to what's really going on with this kid. And she said that as she's been working there for 25 years, her cases have only increased in diversity, and she thinks that it's only going to increase in diversity. What she says is awesome, because she has learned so much about different cultures, and she feels competent as a speech-language pathologist to not only provide services, but to respectfully interact with these cultures in a positive way rather than a negative way that could kind of scare the parents, which is not essentially a good idea or what you want to happen. So, yes, that is my supervisor's experience, lastly, and then my references. I didn't have a difficult time finding, information regarding Honduras and its culture, or, looking up different adoption agencies or finding adoption information. And overall, it's been a great project. I really liked researching a different culture and trying to connect it to a case. I thought it was very challenging in ways and very rewarding in others to, challenge myself to see how much I do know. And it only makes me more intrigued and eager to get out there and become a speech-language pathologist in the near future. So that is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I apologize for talking as much as I did, but I wanted to get, all the information out there for how strongly I feel about some things and the passion that I have for this career. All right, thank you. Bye.